to episode 454 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Grace Winburn and John Wayne.
And Michael O'Malley.
And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about movies that we saw this week in the first part, even though I feel like there's probably two movies that you can assume that we will be discussing for that part, because they're the only two movies anybody's talking about. And
They're
yes,
the only
one
two
of them
movies
is...
ever.
Well, yes...
The Sound of Freedom.
The Sound of Freedom and Disney's Haunted Mansion.
Reckoning.
The only two movies out.
Mission Impossible.
And then in part two, we're going to be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1957's Wild Strawberries. But let's go ahead and get into the discourse. We're going to start with Oppenheimer, which is the latest film from writer-director Christopher Nolan. This one is covers the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer and his role in the development of the atomic bomb during World War II. It stars everyone. No, but really, it stars Cillian Murphy plays Oppenheimer. It also stars Emily Blunt, Matt Damon, Robert Downey Jr., Florence Pugh, Josh Hartnett, litany of other people that I'm not going to sit here and name. Josh from Drake and Josh pushes the atomic bomb button. It's everybody. But yeah, this is the latest from Christopher Nolan as part of Barbenheimer marketing's killer win that it had in the movies this recent past weekend before. But yeah, I'm gonna go around. Grace, I'm gonna start with you. What were your impressions of Oppenheimer?
Absolutely. So I actually got to see this in IMAX. I come from a family of crazy movie people, and we thought it would be really fun to drive 2.5 hours to experience Oppenheimer the way that Christopher Nolan wanted us to in 70mm IMAX. It was incredible. What an experience. Probably my favorite movie-going experience of my entire life. It was amazing to actually see the movie, to see everything. That's always such a rare treat. Sometimes when things are shot, I guess, digitally, especially night scenes, it's very hard to see what's happening even in the theater. So it was very nice. Christopher Nolan said, watch this, and we could, and we did. It was also really sort of comforting to see it on film. There would be these quiet moments in the theater, and then you would hear the like sound of the projector, as it's like running through that that gentle rhythmic sound, and it was a treat. How often do I get to see anything on film? But I really loved this. I think that between the two, I think I enjoyed Oppenheimer more than I did Barbie, but I have a lot more feelings. And Barbie made me feel more than Oppenheimer did. But as far as like the better movie, I think probably Oppenheimer.
I feel like overall more people felt stuff during Barbie than Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
I feel like, yeah.
That's not I know it's not like super controversial or anything. Like, yeah, this is gonna be like a huge Oscar sweep, I am sure, but it was amazing. How interesting for like a historical movie that doesn't like hold your hand through all the historical events, or it felt like it just drops you right in and straps you in and doesn't let go. And
yeah, it doesn't even have like year title cards, which is kind of interesting because I wasn't really sure when the framing device with Robert Downey Jr.'s Senate confirmation. I wasn't sure when that happened until I looked it up after the movie, but I guess it was like late 50s, right?
Yeah, the playing with the timeline. It was very interesting. The three timelines, and it was. I definitely was a little confused, like trying to like parse that out, figure out where we were in the story. I understood it being like two competing timelines, but I didn't realize, which came first, the black and white or the color, or, his Los Alamos timeline.
Yeah, it wasn't apparent to me until a little ways into the movie that like the two hearings were happening like years apart from each other. Like, I guess I thought Oppenheimer's like security hearing was happening concurrent with Robert Downey Jr.'s hearing until like a little ways into the movie, and then I realized, oh, these are at different times. I will say though, it is fairly straightforward for a Nolan movie. Like, there's not any big like structural like wizardry, right? Like, there are the framing devices, but it's not like a Dunkirk or something where there's like really complicated like interplay between all the stuff. Like, it's pretty conventionally like, here's one layer, then we flash back, then we flash back again, and then that's about it. Which is kind of like, I guess that was surprising to me. I wasn't really prepared for this basically to just be a biopic with maybe just like one more flash forward layer or flashback layer added to it. But I don't know. I think that worked for me, but I was expecting it to be more complicated than that.
Yeah, it's funny. I rewatched Dunkirk earlier last week before I went and saw this movie, and that one I think it's good. It does. I don't know. I think he's, especially the last two movies between Tenet and Oppenheimer, he's been working with Jennifer Lame, the editor, and it's tightened up. And I think she has a very good has a keen way of like understanding his, idiosyncrasies to kind of like be able to edit his stuff together. And so Dunkirk is not bad by any stretch, but it's trying to do a little too much. And it gets very like, you also kind of have this raw patriotism to it that also kind of doesn't like take you out, but just kind of seems, I don't know, somewhat strange in the midst of it.
It is kind of telling that like his British World War II movie is very patriotic and his American World War II movie is like very damning of America, which I guess only one of those countries dropped the bomb, so fair.
Yeah. But overall, I was really, I really was pretty moved by this one. Like, I think that you kind of have to figure out what's going on between the black and white and the color. But I mean, for me, like just on like an acting level, it was nice to see for the first time in like 10 years Robert Downey Jr. actually act.
Seriously, I was trying to think when the last movie is where he's not been doing basically like his shtick. Like, there was Iron Man and Dr. Dolittle, and beyond that, I can't tell.
I read this interview, and Christopher Nolan like pretty much went up to him and was like, "Hey, like I want you to play this role, but he pretty much was like, I don't want you to do your shtick. Like, I want you to like play the role." But it's also interesting thinking about that because like some of that comes through because like his shtick is kind of like he's the smartest guy in the room. He's wisecracking. He's, manipulating you a little bit and is like, kind of charming while he does it. And he kind of does a little bit of that, but definitely doesn't like have like the quippy lines and stuff like that. But you see, especially near the end, like that he like it becomes really interesting. His performance as like that smartest guy in the room starts to crumble. Yeah, and it makes
it like sours. Like it's like a version of that where it's like engaging in like a darker undercurrent.
But no, overall, I mean, it's a 3-hour movie that moves pretty smoothly. Like there was never a part where I was super just kind of knocked out of it. I mean, there were, definitely portions of it that I was less interested in than others. I mean, it's crazy that it's also a 3-hour movie that is predominantly taking place in 2 hearings that also is like as entertaining as it is.
Well, and like even like the quote unquote like high tension stuff, like where they're making the bomb, a lot of that stuff is like they're in a room and there's a chalkboard or something and they're like quantum physics and like are drawing like equations and stuff. Like, I think the editing really does like give it like the sense of momentum that it reminded me of have either of you guys seen Oliver Stone's JFK, which is like another movie that's mostly like people talking wall to wall, but it's edited in this really fascinating way that just makes it like build this like tension to it. It's not really the same kind of movie, but like it reminded me of that in the editing.
Yeah. But no, I think even it's a movie that's very like procedural a lot of the times. Like I said, it's 2 hearings. The like, hey, let's kind of get the team together and then like develop the bomb is all very procedural. And like some of that, I don't know, I've been kind of going back and forth with that. I like it because it kind of shows you that there's not like this, there's the aha moments, but there's nothing like really, you never really have like that groundswell like moment of like they've discovered it, it's done. Everything feels very like on the same plane, and so, and it's tough because like it's a guy who like scientifically like sure this is a not achievement but a progress in science, and so like as scientists they're trying to like progress the field, but it's also something that like creates that it really has like altered the chemistry of the world, because now you have this this device, this weapon that can end all life if somebody wanted to. And like it's you kind of have that through line that's somewhat on the nose with the Prometheus myth and things like that going on. But I don't know, I also I thought it was incredible just how he handled the character. Like somebody was I talked to this past week was like, well, I don't want to go see Oppenheimer because like I don't want to like this movie is not a pat on the back for Robert Oppenheimer at any point. Like, I mean, it kind of shows that. To me, that my takeaway was it's a really good example of showing how the American public can manipulate people or the American government can manipulate people into doing what they want, and then completely throwing them out to dry. Like initially the conclusion is, hey, like let's get this so we can bomb Hitler because Hitler's killing Jews and Oppenheimer is Jewish and he wants to he's like these people, he's hurting my people, et cetera, et cetera. And then then Hitler dies, and then it kind of passes that, and then it's like, well, Japan's pretty much done. But it
reminds me of how in at the end of Doctor Strangelove when they cancel the mission, but they're like, well, shoot, we flew all the way out here. We're not gonna drop a bomb.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's kind of like, but it's also and you have the scene between the Benny Safdie character and Oppenheimer where it's like, yeah, if it wasn't you, it was going to be somebody else. Like they were going to make this thing happen, and they were going to drop it no matter what, because it had nothing to do with Germany, it had nothing to do with Japan, it had nothing to do with the Soviet Union. It was literally just a big, dick in the face of everybody going, we're the top dog, America type thing. And like it's just kind of the lasting mark I had on it was just like, yeah, like that's unfortunately what happens now is like we have these incredible minds, these like scientists who are trying to like achieve these things, and they're just doing it to like destroy the world. It's just kind of it's not anything admirable. It's just more just the stupidity of humanity that's what we're doing.
I do think the movie like shows that Oppenheimer himself, and which I'm not like an expert in the guy historically, but at least as he's like painted in the movie, it shows that he was like a guy uniquely susceptible to doing something like this, though, because I don't know, like he, even before he's involved with like the Manhattan Project, he's shown to be kind of like pompous is the wrong word, but he's like he's kind of an asshole and like doesn't think through, like he has, like for instance, like he has all this engagement with like left-wing politics for the first like hour of the movie, but then like he starts doing the thing where it just seems like he wants to be smarter than all the other communists. Like there's a scene in which he and Florence Pugh are like quoting to each other parts of Das Kapital, and he's like, oh, I read it in the original German, so here's what I think the translation should be, or something like that, and you get the impression that like he does care about some of these things, but he lets this like drive to be like this kind of like this drive to be in control, this drive to be the this kind of iconoclastic genius allows him, or not allows him, but it pushes him into this kind of like place where like ideology or values don't matter. And it's like that, I mean, yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's just this moral inaction. I mean, he lives in theory exclusively. Anything is possible in theory, and then the rest of us, we all live in his reality, and we suffer the consequences from his theory in reality. And I totally agree. He is so above it all. People are calling him a prophet, to his face, and he's not, disagreeing with them, but like welcoming that.
Right. Well, and it's
know.
like that makes him a really charismatic figure for a lot of people. But then when it comes time to do the things that he purportedly believes in, like right before they bomb Japan, there's a concerted push by a lot of the scientists to like, we need to, are you going to sign this petition to tell him not to drop the bomb? And he refuses to do that because it would alienate him from the U.S. power structure through the military and all this. And then I don't know, like I do think that like that's a really compelling hero arc. I do think that the movie, I'm not sure how it matches with some of the later hearing stuff, like to be honest, which kind of paints him as this like martyr of McCarthyism almost, which I don't know, like it's not as if the fact that he flaked on like moral duty in his involvement with the Manhattan Project is irrelevant to what happens in the hearings, because that's about political vengeance that involves like manipulating his like early and maybe insincere left-wing activities. Like I was unclear like what the connection between those was supposed to be. And so like when the movie pivots in the last the last like half hour is like entirely on that, like Robert Downey Jr. is trying to be confirmed to the Senate is it Department of Commerce or something like that? But then they're like grilling this dude about like his associations with Robert Oppenheimer, and then we see like all of Oppenheimer's like hearings where basically he's kicked out of all of his like security clearances, and it's weird. He's like painted as kind of like a victim, but the victimhood that he gets doesn't have anything to do with the Manhattan Project stuff. And so I wasn't sure how that connected, except just as a matter of historic record. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Well, like they like interview a lot of his colleagues, right, to like determine whether or not like he is as American as he says he is, like discussing his ties to communism and the history, like is it that like if they were to deny him that clearance, then that would like invalidate his contributions to the American military complex with like the bomb, and like
but
is
they
it
want
that
to deny him his military as an act of like that. Robert Downey Jr. is intentionally sabotaging that just because he's pissed at him for being a pompous asshole, right? Like, isn't that? I don't know, like his kind of tragic arc of I'm so theoretical that I'm going to make this bomb that I've not really thought through the consequences of making this bomb, and then once the bomb goes off I have huge regret, but I can't undo it, so I have to kind of lean into this kind of non-proliferation position. I don't see how that connects with Robert Downey Jr. is pissed at him because of a personal slight.
I think I read it as like Robert Downey Jr. is thinking like a politician, and Oppenheimer's thinking like a scientist, and Robert Downey Jr.'s like thinking like he's doing this to like gain whatever upper hand or whatever on him in like some political game, and so he's like thinking like that, and that's why he kind of he gets thwarted, because it's kind of like, yeah, like that's not, you're just thinking in this like very like American politics system kind of way, and not that it's more just that's not how most people or scientists really think.
Yeah, it just felt like a large part of the movie to, I don't know, I had a hard time reconciling those pieces together. It made me kind of, since the movie ends like that, it made me feel like I lost the movie a little bit until the end. That last scene with Einstein's really good. But I kind of fell out of the movie in the last little bit when it like exclusively focuses on the hearing, because I couldn't connect it to like the thesis of his Manhattan Project years, which I thought was really strong.
Yeah. Well, Oppenheimer, it's still in theaters, still going strong. It seems like it's impossible to get into IMAX, so lucky Grace for getting in.
Yeah. Oh man, we ordered our tickets like months in advance. We were very, very excited. It was super important to us. I wanted to get up there into the projection booth and meet the projectionist. I had a friend that did that.
Did they do that?
Yeah, cool. She wrote a thank you letter to the projectionist and
wow.
shared with management that she's like, hey, I have this thank you letter for the projectionist. Can I give it to them?
Prepared?
Huh?
Did you have a letter prepared?
Well, I wanted to. I was waiting around. My dad was a projectionist for a little bit, and I have a story about him projecting wild strawberries, and we'll talk about it. And
No kidding.
In the later half. But I want
Teaser.
Yeah. Whoa. But like, I definitely wanted to get up there to see the 6-mile long print that they had to like specially 3D print a tray for, see what it was like.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I was very looking forward to it. It was incredible to experience the Trinity test like in IMAX. I definitely felt it liquefy my kidneys. I felt like I was there. But this Oppenheimer has been great. I mean, has it been really fun for you guys? Like people coming up to you like, hey, you saw Oppenheimer. You want to talk about it? Like, how exciting has it been? Like this whole Barbenheimer experience, people are, wanting to discuss, moral implications of dropping a bomb and, what feminism and patriarchy is in 2023. So thank you to Barbenheimer.
Yeah, it's weird because part of this is not a helpful response, and I don't say this to people, but part of me is like, we could have been doing this all along. Like, there's been movies, like, I don't really understand why these two movies have clicked with people, whereas, like, I don't know, like, any other, like, movie didn't. Like, it's not like, I mean, there are fewer movies like Oppenheimer put out now than there were, but it's not like those movies are never put out. And it's like, no one asked me about The Fabelmans, but that was a movie that was out there that was a long movie made by a really famous filmmaker that had like lots of accolades and stuff. And I don't really understand the kind of like chemistry that's happened between Barbie and Oppenheimer that has made everyone go see it. But it has been fun, like a sold out theater. Like I can't remember the last time I was in like a theater that was as full as these movies, and that's kind of nice. Maybe I hope people remember that movies exist after this.
It definitely feels like it.
Well, don't worry. The studios are making sure that we don't.
Oh yeah,
they're definitely going to do that Polly
Pocket.
Who knows? I think
this will probably sweep the Oscars because no other movies will be made this year.
Well, let's go to the other half of the Barbenheimer, and let's talk about Barbie, which is directed by Greta Gerwig. It's still a strange occurrence, but here we are. Barbie and Ken are having the time of their lives in the colorful and seemingly perfect world of Barbie Land. However, when they get a chance to go to the real world, they soon discover the joys and perils of living among humans.
I will say Ken's not having quite the time of his life.
That's true.
He's a little dissatisfied at the beginning.
That's very true. Margot Robbie, Ryan Gosling, Kate McKinnon, America Ferrera, Michael Cera, Will Ferrell, all in this. A bunch of other people as well.
This is another movie that stars everybody.
A lot of people in this one. Who do you think I should start with this one?
Zach, you start.
You want me to start?
Go.
I'm kind of like, I don't know. At this point, I'm tired of talking. I'm tired of talking about Barbie.
You wore yourself out before the podcast.
Yeah, I wore myself.
The most important time to talk about. Barbie.
I wore myself out talking about it because that's again like to Grace's point before. Like people are asking, and I'm just like, yeah, I mean, I saw it, but it is what it is. It's fine. I have to really give a kudos to the production design and things like that. Like Barbie Land is amazing. But and really like honestly, anytime that you're just that the movie has just Barbie and Ken, Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling doing stuff, it's highly enjoyable. I don't know why they didn't just like make that most of the movie is just Barbie and Ken doing stuff because they're highly enjoyable. And it's I'm sorry, but like Ryan Gosling gives the best performance in this movie. He's great. He's really good.
100%.
Definitely.
And so, but then they throw all this other stuff in, so you have like this whole. Well, pretty much Barbie is trying to find the person who's playing with her doll, like in the real world. Like you have this kind of like connection thing going on, and that story plays out with America Ferrera's character and her daughter. And that's fine. It's very like by the books, pretty pretty simple, basic, mother-daughter reconciliation plot. But then you have this other subplot with like the Mattel board members led by the CEO. That's Will Ferrell. That honestly, you should have just dumped that entire section out of this movie because it doesn't land anywhere. It really it has some pretty just kind of softened commentary on like corporations and capitalism and things like that. It just really doesn't like do anything. Like it doesn't really add anything to it. Like Will Ferrell feels like he's kicking at like 50% for this one. He's just kind of like, whatever.
Yeah, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop with that, but it literally, like, they're kind of well-meaning doofuses the entire time with no progression.
Yeah, and I thought there was gonna be like, is there gonna be like some kind of like commentary on this? Are they gonna like poke fun at this?
Like a villain. I was genuinely waiting on a villain reveal.
They're gonna break up the Mattel Corporation.
And they never did. And I'm just like, well, this was stupid. Then why did you have this?
Yeah, the moment when you see them, it's like this really ironic moment because like I can't remember what the context is, but the context is like, what woman must be in charge of Barbie making all these wonderful decisions, and then it like goes to this boardroom that's all these identical like men, and like the joke is like, oh, it's all these men in charge of Barbie, ha ha ha, and that's as critical as it ever gets. Like most of the other time, it's like assuring us that the CEO of Mattel is woke, just kind of out of touch. Like it's very strange. I didn't think it worked at all.
No, it's just like, honestly, like, again, like if you took all the time that you gave to that and gave it to like Ken and Barbie doing stuff, it would have been fine.
More scenes of Ryan Gosling finding out about horses.
Exactly. Like, it's great. But overall, I don't know. I've gone back and forth with this one. I also found like the whole like overarching feminist message not bad in any way, but just kind of, it felt very like out of date, which I guess is not to say that feminism is in any way out of date, but to be quite honest and to get myself in trouble, it felt a lot like some white woman feminism than actual like all-inclusive feminism. Like here's a few examples. One, you have like there is like this sense of inclusion. You see Barbies of different shapes and sizes and just all rainbow of Barbies. But you kind of get a lot of just like little small like token moments of like, you have this Barbie that's in a wheelchair dancing at the party, and you see her very briefly and it like sticks on her for a while and is like, wheelchair Barbie, that's so inclusive. You never see that Barbie ever again. She's gone. She's hit her quota on that one. You get to kind of the ending moments of this and this kind of explanation of the patriarchy and why Barbies have to rise above the Kens. And I'll be honest, I'm fine with that. I don't like how Barbie treats Ken at the end. I honestly kind of felt like it was kind of I felt like it was like just the whole like where they're all singing around, they're singing Matchbox 20 and they're like manipulate him in that way.
That shit was hilarious though, and that song
they're
dropped,
emotionally abusing the Kens,
and like, but I don't know, like
hurting their feelings, pitting them against each other.
I felt like it was. I kind of was like, but guys, like, feminism is about everyone. It's not. It's about women 100%, but it's also about like inclusion and equity for everybody, and it didn't feel like that was the message that kind of came across. I think yeah, somebody's gonna be like, no, Zach, you're wrong. Like, yeah, it is. That's what they're saying.
No, Zach, you're wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah, she apologized. She's like, maybe not every night should be girls' night.
Yeah, and then they're like, we're not gonna go back to exactly the way things were before. We're gonna change a little.
I do agree that there's a lot of jokes at the expense of Ken.
It's little.
The last
thing
I'll just say, it just seems like a movie that wants. The other thing that I have against it is that it's a movie that wants to have its cake and eat it too. It's a movie that's constantly like in the script reacting to what they think somebody will jump on, whether it's in a review or on the internet or something. Like, there's constantly like jumping in front of moments that you would think people would do. That's just reactionary internet writing is just bad. Like, I didn't like any of that stuff. And yeah, I don't know.
Yes. some of those lines are weird. Like, there's the moment where whatever her name is, Carla from Cheers shows up, and she's the creator of Barbie. And
Ruth.
they just have a throwaway line where it's like, oh, and also I evaded taxes, and that's why I am no longer involved with Mattel or something like that. And then just goes on, like, and they make a few other joke references to her tax crimes, but it goes on, and it feels 100% like, oh, if someone Googles the Barbie creator, they're going to find out that she evaded her taxes, and we didn't mention that in the movie, so that's going to be a slight against the movie. There are definitely some parts that were like that. I agree.
And so that's kind of my overall. I just felt like it. Again, like I didn't dislike it. I enjoyed myself through it. There's a lot of funny moments throughout it, but I just felt like overall it was a movie that kind of wanted its cake, wanted to, have its cake and eat it too, and just was like trying to do too much to like shield itself from stuff. And I'm just kind of like, just be yourself. That's the message of your movie. Like, just be yourself, instead of like trying to react to the internet. But I'll stop talking.
I think that, like, with someone who would be as conscious of the issues of making a Barbie movie as Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach, who like co-wrote it, like surely are, like the movie is neurotic about its own identity, and I think that that's where that's coming from. And a certain part of me just feels like, well, if you felt weird about making a Barbie movie, you shouldn't have made a Barbie movie, because there's all the kind of like half-hearted critiques of like Mattel and like Barbie as a like as an example of femininity or whatever. And there's even like some weird, like, there's like a throwaway line by the narrator. There's a narrator where like Margot Robbie's Barbie is like, who is called stereotypical Barbie, which is like the Barbie everyone thinks of when you think of Barbie, is like breaking down and having like a crisis about like body image, and then the narrator says maybe not a great point to make when you cast Margot Robbie as Barbie. And I thought that was very strange. It's like, but you did cast Margot Robbie as Barbie because she's a beautiful woman, and Barbie is stereotypically a beautiful woman. Like, you can't make a Barbie movie and avoid these issues and also be like a woke, like, critical movie. And I think that the movie never figures out how to thread that line. And also Mattel would never let it thread that line. Like, I think the real reason why the CEOs are in there is almost like the movie's handlers, to make sure that Mattel doesn't come across too badly, because the movie is like somewhat critical of Barbie as an icon of stereotypical beauty, but it can't let it go too far out of that, because then it's going to destroy the image of Barbie, Like, the movie has to both be an ad for Barbie and a critique of Barbie at the same time. And I don't think it is successful at doing both of those things at the same time in a coherent way. I don't know. It was super funny.
I'm gonna say this one thing, and then I want Grace to talk. But I came to the conclusion, especially after the I'm Just Ken dance number. Like, they should have just made this like a Bugsby Berkeley, Vincent Minnelli, like, musical comedy. Like, how fucking fun would that have been?
That, like, interpretive dance fight.
Yeah, it was great. Like, if they made a musical comedy out of this with like Barbie and Ken doing stuff, I would have been like, this is fantastic. Love it. Grace, your turn.
I wanted to ask, did you guys ever play with Barbies? Did you ever have a Barbie?
No, I didn't play with Barbies.
My sister had Barbies, and I remember I kind of played with them a little bit, but not enough where I knew all of the accessories, and like, I couldn't tell you what profession the Barbie was that my sister had or anything like that. Also because a lot of times her clothes were off, so.
Right. Well, so what was it like for you guys when you would play with your Barbies? Like, how would you play? Like, I'm just curious. I promise I have a point.
I would say it was like part of a larger,
if you played with them,
tapestry of playing with all these other toys. Like, there wasn't like, we didn't have a ton of Barbie stuff. I think my sister had like 1 or 2 Barbies, but not any of the houses or big accessories or anything like that. So it was like Barbie and like a stuffed animal, and that, like it. I didn't really conceive of it as like Barbie as Barbie. It was like Barbie would be a role, like some other role.
Kind of like Toy Story.
I don't know.
Whatever
yeah,
we needed.
Toy Story.
Yeah. It all. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I was just curious. I just wanted to know. I definitely had Barbies, and I I had a couple. I had some play sets. I had a brunette Barbie, and that was a big deal because I'm a brunette, and they are usually not brunette. Usually they are blonde. They are Margot Robbie, stereotypical Barbie. So I was definitely really excited for this. I love Greta Gerwig. I love all that she does for women.
Big and large, big and small. Little.
With big and large, big and small, and she does
little.
a lot. Big and little women, and all the ladybirds as well, female birds, ladybirds. I think she does a really good job of. I noticed. There was her kind of like picking up on certain like, themes besides like femininity. There's like the whole mother-daughter like through line throughout, which I also felt they kind of abandoned they kind of resolved it. Gloria and her daughter, they kind of make
how?
up.
Like there was like a missing scene or something where they're like antagonistic at the beginning of the movie, then by the end of the movie they've made up, and I'm not sure.
They could have replaced the Mattel scene with that. Yeah.
They made up when her daughter is like, we have to go back to help Barbie. It's now Kingdom. It has to be Barbie Land. You are my mom. You care about this. I care about you. You love me. I love you. Let's help our friend Barbie. But it did kind of feel like it lost that sort of mother-daughter mending of relationships, generational relationships or generational trauma. It felt like they're like, we fixed it. But no, I totally agree. It kind of felt like, it's like there are all these big, hot button issues of, feminism, patriarchy, and we're going to fix it all in this one movie. And it's like, I don't know. Maybe you need a sequel, like at least like a Barbie 2 to really tackle those things. Because I'll agree, the big monologue moment that America Ferrera had, where she reveals the paradoxical nature of patriarchy to Barbies, all the weird Barbies. We've heard that. We've like. I am a woman. I am a girl. I have heard that before. You can't be too thin, can't be too big, can't be too tall, can't be too short. Like all these things that you are as a woman, which, you can be anything and everything, and you are anything and everything, but you can't be too much of anything and everything. I've heard that my whole life. It's definitely not anything new for me. If anything, this is sort of like a fun little primer on feminism for you guys. I mean, maybe not you specifically, Zach, not you specifically, Michael, but for men. Maybe you.
It's true. I was taking copious notes. Got some Gloria Steinem on my bedside table now.
Yeah. But I definitely noticed, Greta Gerwig's like voice in it, but it didn't feel like she got to really finish grappling with those themes, like especially the mother-daughter. I really wanted to see more of that. They had that line where Ruth says to Barbie, we mothers stand still so our daughters can look back and see how far we've come. And that was powerful, and that made me think back to Lady Bird and Laurie Metcalf and Saoirse Ronan. But there wasn't much there. Then there was also this sort of I had a lot of feelings about the tethered line of play where, like, America Ferrera, she's sad, so her Barbie is sad. And if your Barbie can be anything that you want it to be, anything that you imagine it to be, it makes perfect sense that if she's feeling these feelings, then what her Barbie? Because, I feel like as young girls, maybe life as an adult wouldn't have been so hard or so scary if I had existential dread Barbie instead of Swan Lake Barbie. I'm playing Swan Lake. I'm never going to go to Swan Lake. I'm never going to be a swan princess, but I'm going to have existential dread. I'm going to have cellulite. I'm going to have anxiety. And
I would buy Depressive Episode Barbie or whatever that one that was that they have the actual ad for in the movie.
Oh yeah, if we can, if Barbie is anything that we can dream her to be, and we can play at anything, with her as little girls, as little boys, as little kids, then I guess it's supposed to make being an adult less scary. I've pretended at this. I've pretended to be a Barbie businesswoman. I've pretended to be a Ken CEO. But it's not that, the adult world isn't that. So it is, Gloria's feelings of anxiety and dread and feeling of, like estrangement from her daughter, but they won't make that Barbie. And then like at the end when she's like, what about just an ordinary Barbie? And then, the Mattel CEOs say, no, that's a terrible idea. And then the other one crunches the numbers and he says, actually, that's going to sell. And it's like, so like even just, you being you is commodified, or, this whole struggle to be extraordinary versus extraordinary. Like, but
I did really like, I think that in terms of like a character arc for Barbie, that whole like learning to like cope with like the feelings of like impending like mortality and like age and stuff like that. And then at the end of the movie, I guess she's grown genitals because she's going to the gynecologist or something.
Well, she's human now, and there's a and that's a whole like trans thing. I saw a bunch of people talking about like a nice little trans
really
metaphor.
Nice. Like that was actually a really wonderful note to end the movie on. Is like Barbie moving from being an object, like a literal object, to being humanized. Like I think that's a really strong and like feminist arc that Barbie goes in, but then the like explicit textual discussions of feminism feel hollow compared to that, because it's like America Ferrera's speech, like you mentioned, Grace, but the actual journey of Barbie learning how to be a real person and Barbie being recognized as a real person as opposed to an object that people project ideas onto. I do think that that's like fairly well realized within the movie and is a better arc than some of the other stuff.
I really like that.
The last thing I'll say is I just have one question. If there's no crime or anything bad happening in Barbie Land, then why do they need a Supreme Court at all?
I love that line when they're in LA and they've got the beauty pageants on the board. It's like, oh, look, the Supreme Court. Ryan Gosling, they are so smart. Like,
this movie was so...
He is really looking at their brains. He really respects women.
I think that, like, I was, like you, Zach, pretty conflicted about this movie, but this movie is so funny at times. Like, I'm, like, pretty positive on it overall because, like there's just so many throwaway lines that are just, like, hysterical. Like, there's this one moment where they're doing, like, a montage of, like, things that the Kens do once they've learned about patriarchy and, like, how they treat the Barbies. And there's this one where this dude is, like, lecturing the Barbie about Stephen Malkmus from Pavement and, like, his, like, impact on, like, indie music or whatever. And it's like a 5-second clip of a conversation that was, like, I felt seen. Like, I was like, oh, my God. And, like, there's, like, there's just so much funny stuff in this movie.
I didn't catch that.
I already mentioned the
I didn't
Matchbox
catch
20
that.
scene. Like, when that song first started, I, like, died laughing. It was, like, the perfect song for what it was trying to convey. I just think this movie is so funny as, like, a comedy that I'm like, willing to forgive its shortcomings as, like, a coherent, like, thematic statement. But, yeah, Ryan Gosling, best actor, Oscar, for sure.
He's really good. And also, and second, and then we'll wrap up. Second, Kate McKinnon's really good in this movie.
Margot Robbie's really good for what it's worth. Like, she's really, it's a good cast. Like, everyone's doing good work.
Yeah. Well, let's, from Barbie to what many people refer to now as Ingmar Bergman's Barbie, which is 1957's Wild Strawberries. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll get to that after this. And we're back with part 2 of episode 454 of Cinematary. In this part, we're going to continue our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1957's Wild Strawberries. Written and directed by Ingmar Bergman, the film stars Victor Seastrom, B.B. Anderson, Ingrid Thulin, Gunnar Bjornstrand, and Max von Sydow. Crotchety retired Dr. Isak Borg travels from Stockholm to Lund, Sweden, with his pregnant and unhappy daughter-in-law, Marianne, in order to receive an honorary degree from his alma mater. Along the way, they encounter a series of hitchhikers, each of whom causes the elderly doctor to muse upon the pleasures and failures of his own life. These include the vivacious young Sarah, a dead ringer for the doctor's own first love and cousin. Bergman's idea for the film originated on a drive from Stockholm to Dalarna, during which he stopped in Uppsala, his hometown. Driving by his grandmother's house, he suddenly imagined how it would be if he could open the door and inside find everything just as it was during his childhood. Quote, "So it struck me, what if you could make a film about this, that you could just walk up in a realistic way and open a door and then walk into your childhood, and then you open another door and come back to reality, and then you make a turn around a street corner and arrive in some other period of your existence, and everything goes on, lives." That was actually the idea behind Wild Strawberries. Later, he just recanted all that. In Images, My Life in Film, he comments on his earlier statement, quote, "That's a lie. The truth is that I am forever living in my childhood." Bergman wrote the screenplay of Wild Strawberries in Stockholm's Karolinska Hospital, the workplace of Isak Borg, in the late spring of 1957. He'd recently been given permission to proceed by producer Carl Anders Dimling on the basis of a short synopsis. He was in the hospital for 2 months being treated for recurrent gastric problems and general stress. Bergman's doctor at Karolinska was his good friend Stor Highlander, who invited him to attend his lectures on psychosomatics. Highlander was married to Gunhild Lindblom, who was to play Isak's sister Karolada in the film. Bergman was at a high point of his professional career after a triumphant season at the Malmö City Theatre, in addition to the success of both Smiles of a Summer Night and The Seventh Seal. His private life, however, was in disarray. His third marriage was on the rocks. His affair with Bibi Andersson, which had begun in 1954, was coming to an end, and his relationship with his parents was, after an attempted reconciliation with his mother, at a desperately low ebb. The director's immediate choice for the leading role of the old professor was Victor Seastrom, Bergman's silent film Idol, whom he had directed in To Joy 8 years earlier. Victor, Bergman remarked, was feeling wretched and didn't want to do it. He must have been 78. He was misanthropic and tired and felt old. I had to use all my powers of persuasion to get him to play the part. In Bergman on Bergman, he has stated that he only thought of Seastrom when the screenplay was complete, and that he asked Dimling to contact the famous actor and film director. Yet in Images, My Life in Film, he claims, quote, "It is probably worth noting that I never for a moment thought of Seastrom when I was writing the screenplay. The suggestion came from the film's producer. As I recall, I thought long and hard before I agreed to let him have the part."
This dude needs to get his stories
Yeah,
straight.
I like that Images, My Life in Film is like, no, I lied to you before. During the shooting, the health of the 78-year-old Seastrom gave cause for concern. Dimling had persuaded him to take on the role with the words, "All you have to do is lie under a tree, eat wild strawberries, and talk about your past, so it's nothing too arduous." This was inaccurate, and the burden of the film was completely on Seastrom, who is in all but one scene of the film. Initially, Seastrom had problems with his lines, which made him frustrated and angry. He would go off into a corner and beat his head against the wall in frustration, even to the point of drawing blood and producing bruises. He sometimes...
That really couldn't have helped his health.
I don't know.
God.
He sometimes quibbled over details in the script. To unburden his revered mentor, Bergman made a pact with Ingrid Thulin that if anything went wrong during a scene, she would take the blame on herself. Things improved when they changed filming time so that Seastrom could get home in time for his customary late afternoon whiskey at 5 o'clock. Same thing for me. Seastrom got along particularly well with Bibi Andersson. And the New York Times in 1957 said, "This one is so thoroughly mystifying that we wonder whether Mr. Bergman himself knew what he was trying to say." So that seems very complimentary, but it's Bosley Crowther. What is he like other than, I mean, he liked the jazz singer, so there we are.
I don't feel like this film is particularly opaque.
No, I don't think so either. Had anybody seen had anybody seen Wild Strawberries before?
This is my third or fourth time. I want to hear about Grace's dad, like her hereditary connection to Wild Strawberries, though.
All right,
Sure.
let's get into it.
My hereditary connection to film. I inherited my love of film from my father, so it's definitely in my blood. So he was a projectionist in his undergrad years at UVA. Shout out to my dad, Mark. Dad, if you're listening, yeah, go Mark. We'll get him on the show one day. So he was one of the projectionists for the Film Club Cinema Society. And there was a professor, an English professor, that was showing various art house film. And I tried to ask my dad, like, what the art house films were. And he was like, oh, you know, like Godfather, because this is like in the 70s at UVA. He's like, so like Godfather and whatever. I was like, whoa, okay, yeah, notoriously art house films, of course. There's our tie into Barbie as well. But he said one in particular, and they'd show things, a lot of foreign films. So they had shown Bicycle Thief, and now they were showing Wild Strawberries. And he said it got really hot in the projection booth, and it was really hot, and they have air, you know, flowing. So then there's some condensation that would build up behind the lens of the projector, and so he's got a can of compressed air, and he's keeping an eye on the lens, so it, you know, would fog up, and he'd spray it with compressed air, and that would help clear it. And he had to do that for the entire movie. And then a few weeks go by, and the TA for the class calls him up and says, you know, hey, Mark, were there any problems with the screening of Wild Strawberries? And he says, yes, there was. I had to. And he explains. And then the TA says, okay, well, that explains it. Apparently, one of the students in the viewing of Wild Strawberries wrote this fantastic essay of Bergman's use of fog in the dream subjective sequences. You know, how, oh, the fog rolls in, and it's the fog of memories, and very surreal, gave it this dreamy, atmospheric. They got like 3 whole pages out of it. Apparently they did a great job, but you know, that is what happens, you know, film. Yeah.
That's beautiful. The physical tactility of film.
Yeah, what a wonderful little story. So he told me that story before I had even seen Wild Strawberries, and you know, he's telling me that this professor is showing these art house movies, and you know, I hear Wild Strawberries, and I'm like, I guess this is a difficult film to approach. So I was a little I was very excited when I saw that this was going to be on the series. I was like, finally I can, you know, watch the movie that inspired such a magnificent essay. I wish that we could read it. But no, I totally agree with you, Michael. It's definitely not a difficult movie to approach. It's very beautiful, very easy to follow. I was completely engrossed in it start to finish. And I've started recommending it to other people. You know, like, hey, you saw Oppenheimer. You might also like Wild Strawberries.
Yeah. Another man ambivalent about his life work.
Hounded by his moral ambiguity. Yes, Wild Strawberries.
Yeah, I had watched this since it was one of the movies that Dr. Larson showed in film studies class at UT, and that's the last time I watched this. It's crazy. And it's definitely I think, you know, it got more to stew on at age 31 over age like 23 or whatever it was.
At age 70 whatever.
Yeah,
Isaac is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there are movies that, like, it's not like you can understand them when they're young, but like they accumulate power as you get older because of just being older. I definitely felt that this time. It had been a few years since I had watched it.
And so, yeah, I think I also just have become like a little bit more familiar with like Bergman. Like this was one where it was just like, yeah, like we're going to introduce you a little bit to Bergman and Swedish film with this movie. And yeah, it was nice. It was nice revisiting it. It's such, you know, I don't know. I think with like a lot, you know, there is like this perception, Grace, that like it's going to be like this kind of, it has this aura, not you know, it's just that it's like this European art house movie. It's in black and white. It's this kind of old man like reflecting on his life. Like there's going to be this like, it's going to be very difficult to kind of like settle into it. And it is pretty.
Yeah, I think my dad I think my dad tried to show me Seventh Seal when I was like 9 or 10. So then, like, to revisit this as like Bergman, I was like, wow, I wish you would have shown me this. I would have liked it so much more.
Which it came out at the same year as Wild Strawberries. Like, he made these movies very close to one another.
Which is crazy.
But I think we did the Seventh Seal, was it last year or 2 years ago?
I think it was 2 years ago.
But I think we said the same thing about this. Is like, this movie is strangely approachable.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like for movies,
Turn this off.
Probably not
here.
age.
that's the kind of point I'm getting at. Is like it's a pretty approachable like movie. It really you get a nice crazy dream sequence early on, but like most of it is just them driving through the countryside. You get these three young people with his daughter-in-law and him, and like I'm trying to think. You probably have like maybe two other kind of dream sequences where the one where he goes back and like is watching his cousin lover, reject him for his brother.
And there's the one with the doctor, and he gets pulled into his own coffin.
Yeah, and all that stuff. That's, I think, the more famous one.
His test. The test that he has to take.
Yeah, the test. So those are like the three dreams. But outside of that, it's like it's pretty. It's relatively approachable. Yeah, and it's very pretty. So like I don't know, it's a movie that I think kind of has this perception that it's like this kind of heavy drama that's going to require a lot of attention, like a lot of concentration, attention. It does, but like it's also not like
I almost signed up for that.
Was it Sallow we're watching in a couple weeks? Like
I do wonder if it has that reputation because of Bergman, because like Bergman's got like two very specific halves of his career. Like the first half of his career is he's kind of like warm humanist like films like Smiles of a Summer Night or this movie or whatever. And then like in the 60s he pivots hard toward like these really austere, difficult movies like Persona or like Cries and Whispers or things like that, which are like genuinely difficult and off-putting in ways. And I think that like I think I might be wrong about the timeline, but I'm pretty sure that like Seventh Seal and Wild Strawberries were how he broke into America. Like with the exception of I think like Somewhere with Monica was circulated as like an erotic exploitation film or something. But I think like in terms of like general awareness of Bergman, he was like introduced to American audiences with these movies. Like he really broke big, and then a few years later he starts doing things like Through a Glass Darkly or Persona or something. And so maybe people just like assume like, oh, Bergman did Persona or Silence, so Wild Strawberries must be this theological like anguish, art film.
There are some. I mean, some theological questions of like, is God real? You believed in Santa Claus. You believe in God. I love them.
Dude, those guys are hilarious. They're like having a fist fight over whether they believe in God.
and who loves Sarah the most? Like Sarah's got it made in the shade. In any generation, Sarah has men fighting over her. Left, right, and center.
Important questions like which of us deserves Sarah, and then which of us, is right about God.
Yeah, decide now. But I noticed that like a little bit of theology there. So this was, I would say that this is definitely this is 100% like my first Bergman, and I am, and now to hear the schism in his work, I'm interested to see more. It's kind of a
transitional thing. Like I saw this movie in a UT class as well, Zach. I'm trying to remember. It was with Dr. Malin, I think, but he described this movie as like the dream sequences were like kind of anticipating what Bergman would do in the next decade, and then the rest of the movie was more like what Bergman had done, which I thought was an interesting perspective. And like feels, I think, right to me, but yeah.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask. Like, what did y'all make of the dream sequences? Because you have the one, like we mentioned before, you have the one where he sees himself in the coffin, then you have the one where he's like reflecting on his childhood, and then he has one where he's like taking the test and seeing more of his life. And there's this degree of surrealism to it, but definitely not to the level that you end up getting with like later Bergman, with things like Persona and things like that.
That first dream sequence was very frightening. I mean, I think that I've had some similar nightmares. You know, you have no idea what time it is. That horrifying buggy, that horse and carriage carrying a coffin, like, you know exactly what's in there. A dead body, like that was, you know, like that was very scary. I think, and it felt like these dreams were him, like it started out as him fearing death as an old man. His, you know, death is coming for him. It is imminent as a 70-something-year-old man, and, you know, will he die before he's able to complete this journey of this traveling journey to get his honorary degree? Will he die before he like accomplishes these important moments in his life? Will he die before he makes peace with his life? And that just out of time, that anxiety is there. And then as the dreams go on, it seems like it was him, you know, much more accepting of his death and accepting and welcoming of it. That it's not this scary thing looming in the future for him. It's something peaceful. It's something beautiful. It's familiar, even like sleeping. It's just on the other side of your dreams. But I loved all of the dream sequence. I especially loved the one of him and Sarah when Sarah holds up the mirror to him. It's like, you're old now, Isaac. Yeah. You have to face that. Like, I loved that.
This was Seastrom's last movie, right?
I feel like it, yeah.
It is, like, funny that Bergman kind of waffled on whether or not he considered him in the writing of this movie, because it's kind of perfect for him. I don't know, like, there's something about, like, a guy who's having, like, you know, health problems related to old age on set, playing a man who's grappling with his mortality and stuff. Sorry, Zach, what were you going to say?
Well, now I'm looking for... Yeah, this was his last movie.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
Because he died 3 years later.
That's kind of a wonderful little meta connection there.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say also, like, you know, you mentioned kind of like there's sleeping not only like where he goes in the dreamland, but there's also just like this kind of concept of like sleeping through life to a degree that like he seems to kind of do a lot of. And then his daughter-in-law talks a lot about like how you have like the scene where she's telling his son that, you know, she's pregnant, and he's just kind of like, well, you got to pick the baby or me, because, you know, life is fucking awful.
Yeah, that son needs some
but like you just, you know, you kind of have like this, you know, almost I forgot, somebody says it like almost like sleepwalking through life type, you know, where it's you also kind of have like it's almost like he's kind of holding on to this nostalgia, but has just kind of, since that didn't pan out like he felt like it should have, he's just kind of, you know, rolled through life. It's almost like an Akiru type situation where it's like you rolled through life but you didn't really live it type thing. It doesn't really like go as far as like an Akiru does, but I like that it kind of just goes in this direction of like, you know, it's like passed on generationally, which is kind of interesting.
And I think also like one of the things that's really moving and I think warm about the movie is that even though the premise of the movie involves him getting like a Lifetime Achievement Award, basically, we know nothing about his life's work, and he spends almost zero time thinking about his life's work. Like all of his memories and nostalgia have to do with the people that have come in and out of his life and his family and stuff. And I think that that's like, I don't know, that's so sweet on a level, but it also is sadder too. Like if it were, so a movie like Oppenheimer, in which like a good portion of the back half of the movie is Oppenheimer expressing some sort of regret over his work. He doesn't have a lot of regret over how he's interacted with people so much, and that makes it kind of like this like ideas-based abstract thing, like the regret he feels. But I think that in Wild Strawberries, there's a real visceral and like universal feel to his regret, because it's not, oh, I created this great and terrible thing and now I'm not sure how I've used my life. It's, there are people in my life and relationships in my life that kind of withered and got away from me, and I regret that and I miss those people. And I think that that's such a like a universal feeling. And like as I've gotten older and like people have come in and out of my life, I mean, like in terms of like this movie, like that is something that hit me harder this time than when I was in my 20s watching it, because there have been more people who have just like kind of filtered out of my life, or that I have regret about, like, you know, where I kind of left things with them, or like family who, you know, things have changed with them. I don't know. Recently, like in the past year, my parents moved from the house that I was in. Grew up in, not exclusively, but the house I spent a lot of time in growing up. They moved to a one-story house so that they could, you know, not have to deal with stairs in their old age. But I didn't, as I was moving my parents out of their house, like I didn't think about it this way. But having gone to their new house now several times, I've started to miss the old house, which is something I didn't think I would miss, because I didn't feel like I had a personal connection to that house. But seeing my parents in a context that still feels new to me, but is their home, it makes me realize like that we're in a different stage of life now, and that like things in the past are now firmly in the past now. Like the house that I spent time in is no longer something that I can visit. And there is something about, even though like I don't really care about that old house in and of itself, like what it represents is meaningful to me, you know, in the passage of time. And I think that this movie does a really great job of like dramatizing that. Like there's that fairly long sequence where you see like the family dinner, and then the house itself in the contemporary times is like vacant, I think, right? And there's something really moving and almost haunting about the juxtaposition of those things, where he sees like what are essentially ghosts of like what his family life used to be. And it's such a, like, it's kind of goofy. Like there's these twins that always talk at the same time, and there's like
his deaf uncle.
Yeah,
can't hear the song.
Yeah, and it's like, it's silly and funny, but then juxtaposed with the contemporary state of the house, which is empty, it's haunting. And like I feel like that's just an inevitable human experience. Like as you go through life, there are things that you can never return to and simply become memories. And even if they're memories that you don't have particular affection for, the fact that you can't return to them anymore in physicality is like, I don't know, that's getting older.
Yeah. No, there's something very haunting about like, especially, you know, a house that like was like fully lived in that then is like kind of empty and abandoned. That was something that really resonated with me with that David Lowery movie, A Ghost Story.
Yeah.
Where, you know, it's like, it was like this lived in space with life and love and anger and all these different emotions, and then it's like just gone, and then it's just empty, and then another one's like kind of plastered on top, and like, you know, it's just kind of like how a space can be so many different things for so many different people, but like everybody has like that like very specific memory of the space that's usually, you know, incredibly different from the other person because they you know, developed it in a different way. There's just something kind of like haunting and magical about that to me. Like I'm just, I kind of love that. Yeah, and you get a little bit of that in this movie.
And the fact that like the title of the movie, Wild Strawberries, that like just very small sensory thing of eating those strawberries, like there are things like to say another thing like about myself, like in the past year my grandfather had a stroke, and so he's been moving into assisted living and moving out of this house that I visited quite a bit growing up. And like I remember going there last summer, which is probably the last time I'll go to this house, and like the way that their basement smelled, because that's where I would sleep when I would go there, like it's just this kind of musty smell, but it's like a smell that like, you know, I will forever associate with like that house. And there's like the way that this particular light looks in this corner of the basement, that like if I think about that, like all of a sudden like all these other things are kind of connected to that. And like the whole like premise of like, oh, there used to be this patch of fruit here that we used to pick is just so, it's just so poignant that like there's that small thing is a synecdoche of this entire like earlier portion of his life.
I really agree with that. I mean, like, you know, what is it in Lost Highway when she says, they say, I like to remember things, not necessarily how they happen, but, you know, how I remember them. And so then that kind of got me thinking about, like, the role that, like, memory plays in this. And some of those flashback sequences, I'm like, how do you know how did you know that some of these things were happening? I guess was like one of my questions. I mean, that's kind of different than from what, the wonderful, beautiful things that Michael was saying about, change and growing older. But I guess in some of those sequences, I was just sort of, maybe I kind of want to put this to you guys, but that sequence with his wife, when his wife was that his wife in the woods dancing with that man and having that affair with that man?
That's the one who he actually marries.
Yeah. How did, so he was there, he had seen that. I'm sorry, this kind of feels like to derail that whole conversation, but, I guess, sorry, that was a little confusing for me.
No,
I couldn't really grasp if he had seen it or not, but it just kind of showing, to me, it was kind of showing how, you got the kind of deep outpour of love that Sarah had for him, even though she ended up with his brother. She clearly had all this deep well of care and love for him. And so when she ended up with his brother and he married this woman, it was more just kind of confirming probably that there was a distance between them. At least that's how I interpreted it.
Yeah, I think that's what I got out of it too, is that he's he has regret and pines over Sarah, and then the one thing we do see of his own wife is her with someone who's not him, and so that, I don't know, some sort of dissatisfaction, or although ironically, Sarah ends up with someone who's not him too, but he, I don't know, maybe after he couldn't be with Sarah, he got to be with this other woman, and just recognizing that well, that was never as special as what I could have had with someone else. But even that's maybe a fabrication of his own subjectivity, because she didn't go with him. So had they gotten married, would it have been any happier than this other woman who was interested in other people too? I don't know.
Sorry. That was one thing that was kind of kicking around in my brain. I was like, oh, hey, I need to ask about this. I was a little confused because, I say, this is my...
You're gonna have to watch one of those YouTube videos that's we explain everything in 1957's Wild Strawberries.
This is actually
CinemaSins Wild Strawberries.
This is actually what it means. Yeah.
Any final thoughts on Wild Strawberries before we wrap up?
Yeah. Yes. Some more. What do you guys think about that married couple that they basically had that accident with, that they ran off the road? What did you guys think about them?
I think they're surprisingly okay given that accident.
Yeah, and the way that they just pull the car back up on the road, God, that's Swedish engineering.
Superhuman, Swedes.
Yeah, they just lift a car back up and flip it back on the road, and everybody's just fine, and they just get in the car. That was an interesting scene.
There's have you seen Before Midnight? I know this feels irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, you know how at the beginning of Before Midnight you have the younger couple that are kind of supposed to be baby, kind of representing of youth or whatever, and then there's them, Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy as middle-aged at that point. I kind of feel that's the role that couple played, is that you had the really young people, the hitchhikers, and then you had the kind of people who were in middle age, domestic and kind of unhappy, and then you had Isak, who's at the end of his life. And so you had this whole spectrum of people within the car all at the same time. And then they
kick out the young in the back, the middle age in the middle,
Marianne
and the old in the front. It's great.
Yeah, and then they have to kick out the the middle-aged couple, because that's what no one wants. That's the thing that no one in the movie wants to think about, is that kind of he never thinks about his career. He barely thinks about his marriage. He wants to think back to his childhood or think about his mortality. That middle portion, which I think probably encompassed the majority of his life, he that's just unpleasant, and he wants to ignore it. I don't know. That's kind of my thoughts on that. And that's kind of where Ingrid Thulin's character is at that very moment, is in this looking in entering into parenthood, having this kind of domestic life, but also as a function of that becoming less free and less happy and less connected to the people in her life. Like, and so I don't know, there's like a weird like parallel there with her too, I feel like, especially when we get the scene between her and her husband. I don't know. Those are my thoughts on that.
I was like, this is another thing to ask everybody's opinions on. Hear what they think. Yeah, it was rough. When he slaps her in the face in front of everyone, I was like, oh my God. They just let anything happen.
They did kick him out of the car not too long after that.
Yeah, but nobody tried to run up on him for beating his wife. That's how you know this is a foreign film. I'm just kidding.
People were hitting their wives in American films.
Right. Yeah, no, you're right.
We see John Wayne kind of tipping his hat there in the background.
Yeah, lady.
Hey.
Yeah, he's just like, yeah, I did. Grace, you better look out later.
This cardboard cutout.
You beat up John Wayne, though. You beat him up.
I hope that dying is as peaceful as sleeping. I think that. Do you guys think that he passed away at the end? I think that he did. I think that he like accomplished everything, and then he like that last bit of kindness there with Agda. I think that maybe he drifted away, and that was that. I don't know.
No, I think he's still.
You think he's still going? You think he's still alive? But, you know,
I think he's still going.
It was just so.
He's got to find B.B. Anderson again.
Yeah, it was tender. You know, we finally get to see his parents, or you know, he gets to see his parents. You know, as a small kid. And it was just very tender. I just hope that that's what dying is like for me. I hope it's a kindness. I hope they serve wild strawberries in heaven.
And on that note, let's wrap up this episode of Cemetery. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter and Instagram. Oh, sorry, X and Instagram.
Don't cave, Zach.
Twitter.com/Cinematary and Instagram.com/Cinematary. And then you can find all the movies we talked about in this episode on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary. If you'd like to support the show, head to patreon.com/Cinematary. You can give us as low as $1, $5, whatever you feel. Thank you to our patrons, Cam, Chad Newsom, Candace Sisson, Ron Hayes, Teresa Marsathi, and Tyler Chandler. Thank you so much for your patronage. Next episode, we're going to be talking about Harakiri. Which I'll be honest, don't know too much about. But from 1962, the Masaki Kobayashi movie. But there's samurai.
I looked it up on Google, and one of the first results, where it's like people also search for, and one of the like questions that it fed to me was, why is Harakiri so good?
That's what we have to look forward to.
That's what we have to look forward to. I'm really excited.
That's what we gotta look forward to.
It's good.
There you go. Thanks y'all for listening. It's good. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next episode.